Okay, I think it's 12:03, so we will go ahead and get started for the day. I just have a couple of topics to cover, and then if you all have any questions that you want to ask, we should have time for that as well today. So just as a reminder, if you've dialed in through your computer, make sure that you stay on mute, but you should have the ability to unmute yourself if you have any questions, or type them into the chat box. And you can also make sure that if you've called in from your phone that you keep yourself muted, and then unmute if you have questions, just to cut down on any background noise. So get started here. Just a reminder of the purpose of our calls, just to have us have an opportunity to chat and talk through the issues that you're all working on in your local areas. The objectives of today's call specifically is to provide you an overview of what new local workforce development websites will look like. Also review an intent to apply for NDWG award funds for local areas to apply for those funds to IWD. And then again, any general questions that you might have. So I'm gonna start with just again, our bi-weekly reminder of the key deliverables and timelines that are very quickly approaching. As you should know by now, the deadline to have these key tasks in place is September 1st, which is just about 3 weeks away. I know that most of you are well on your way to achieving these deadlines, and I just wanted to point out that if you have completed your 28E agreement or your shared liability agreement, to make sure that you send in a signed copy of that. You can send it directly to me or to the WEO governance email address. We just need to get those so that I can review them, and I'll put them on file with the Secretary of State's office so that they are officially 2080 agreements. Also, when you have your local workforce development board seated and compliant, you need to send that to me as well, because IWD does have the responsibility to certify your local board, make sure that it meets all of the requirements for a compliant board. And hopefully, if you haven't finalized any of those things yet, you're working on these things simultaneously, because it is going to be very important that these things are in place for September 1st. As we discussed a couple of weeks ago, we'll have trainings coming up in mid-September for the fiscal agents, followed shortly by training for your local workforce development board. So if there are any questions or concerns or issues with meeting the September 1st deadline, I would highly encourage you to reach out to myself or Linda Rouse or Mike Witt so that we can make sure that you can meet those deadlines and we can move forward with the next steps in our WEOA system transformation. The first thing that I wanted to talk to you about today was local board websites. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but each of the existing previous 15 regions had a local board website linked to the State Workforce Development Board website, which I'm going to show you here in a second. And so talking through what that looks like going forward, the solution that we've come up with is to sort of wipe the slate clean and give every one of the new local workforce development areas a new local board website. So what that will entail is archiving the old sites, so everything will still be accessible. And they'll be accessible from the new board site, so that will be easy. But this is really a place for the local area, the local board specifically, to ensure that they are meeting all of the public meeting notification requirements through Iowa Sunshine Laws, posting necessary documents, meeting minutes, local board policies that your local boards will work to develop soon, your local plans, any RFPs that you need to post, all of those things. This is a great place to do that publicly. Also, you know, who the board members are, how to contact the board, all of those things. So IWD in the past has done this and will continue to do this, but we can host a site for you in your local area, and that is free of charge. We don't charge anybody for that. But realistically, this is a locally driven topic. And I would assume that most of you eventually will get to a point where you would develop and maintain your own website completely. And when that time comes, then we can also archive this site, and then we would just put a link on our State Workforce Development Board website out to each of the local workforce board sites. And so we can look through a couple examples of that. So I just want to be very clear today also that it will be the responsibility of the local board to maintain the information on the site, make sure that it's up to date, that you're posting your meetings and all of those things. Typically, that would be something that would fall to the staff to the board to handle, I would assume. But if you don't have staff to the board yet or haven't clearly defined those roles, it is the local board's responsibility. This is not something that your service provider should be doing for you or anything like that, which I point out only because up till now, that is something that many of the service providers have been doing in the different local areas. So IWD will set up these sites. We actually have them all ready to go. What we just need to do is identify who that sort of administrative person will be or persons. We will provide training for how to update the site and maintain the information, as well as a guide for those administrators to use to help that. And obviously we will maintain any sort of technical assistance that we can, but you know, our job would just be to assist you in posting that information and maintaining those sites, but not actually physically doing the work. So I'm going to switch away from the PowerPoint here and just take you out to the website to give you sort of a demo. So what we're first looking at right here is the State Workforce Development website homepage. And if you'll notice, there have been some updates. The new map with the new local areas has been posted. And currently, because we haven't taken the new sites live, it still shows the old information. So what you have over here on the left-hand navigation site is the regional board websites. So these will all end up being archived, and it'll be replaced right here with a section that says local workforce development board sites or something similar to that. And then it'll be by, you know, Northwest, Northeast, Central, Mississippi Valley. Everybody will have a link here to just click on. Once you click on that, you'll go to the new website, and they are all designed the exact same with the same sub pages and everything like that. So this is just really designed sort of to make sure that the basic information that you may want to post on your site is available, and there's a spot for you to post that. Yesterday afternoon, I sent an email to all of the CEOs and staff to the board and everyone that's included on these calls with some information. So hopefully that will help between me walking through this today and the email that I sent yesterday. But on the homepage for each site, so this is the Northeast Iowa Local Board website, the homepage includes a link for people to be able to get to the iowaworks.gov website, which is where job seekers and employers can search for jobs, look for services, and all of those types of things. So that's just going to be there, and it links you out to that other site. There's just a quick blurb here about what the Northeast Iowa Workforce Development Board does in the area that it covers, including listing of all the county. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, keep going. Sorry. Again, if the Northeast Iowa Local Workforce Development Board develops a mission or a vision or any sort of content that they wanted to add, you know, the homepage might be a good place to put that. But for right now, we have some standard information that would be the same for each of the local areas. So that would be the homepage. Each site will have a committees page because, as you know, under the law in WIOA, there are some required committees for the local board to have. So you can put some information about those boards, who the members are, what they're working towards. These are just sort of some placeholders for this test site for now, but this information can be changed. Additionally, a page for you to put governing documents. So some test documents out there right now, but the documents that would be envisioned to go on this page that you would want to post publicly, the LWDB bylaws, the local plan that you'll eventually write and post, including the Memorandum of Understanding and FIA for your local area, and also the one-stop certification would be examples of documents that could be posted on this governance page. The members page, which I think is pretty cool, is designed for you to be able to upload headshots of the board members, put their title, the sector that they represent, contact information if you'd like, and all sorts of things. And so obviously there are more than 2 board members, so this is just an example of what that would look like. We've also included a calendar page for you to upload any upcoming meetings or events that you want to make available. That's there. For this one, for some reason, you have to hit the back button. And then an additional page to post meeting minutes, meeting agendas, reports, any other documents that you know, you need to post publicly could be pasted on this page. Eventually this page, the local policies page, will probably be quite full, as there is a requirement for local area to have their own policy in many places, which don't worry, we're not there yet. That's okay. It's because it's a responsibility of the local board, not the CEOs. So when we go through local board training, we will dive into this more, but so there will be policies that you'll want to post. And the same thing with reports. So typically the local area will produce an annual report that you would possibly want to post here for people to be able to go back and see what accomplishments the local area found achieved the year before and things like that. A place for you to, again, post procurements. So when you're doing your RFPs for service providers or one-stop operators or anything else that you may need to procure, there'd be a spot here for that. There's also a contact us page, which is designed for people to be able to input their information and questions and submit those comments. So one of the things that we will need is, what email address should be on the back end of this, right? And who would be responsible for checking that and responding to these things. Again, possibly staff to the board or board chair, however you want that to work out. And then again, with this being the Northeast Iowa's page, the previous regions 1, 2, and 7 archived pages will be accessible from the new page. So you'll be easily able to go and get the previous information. So that is sort of a brief overview of what the new individual local area, local workforce development board pages will contain. Again, if we go back to the main state workforce development board page, the one thing I would point out, for example, Central Iowa has hosted their own web page for quite a while. So something similar where, again, it'll say local workforce development boards and it'll say Central Iowa local workforce development board here instead of region 11. When I click on it, instead of going to the page I just showed you, it would take you out to the Central Iowa Workforce Development Board's homepage. And we would do that for every local area as they create their own pages and maintain them. Other thing I just want to point out to you is I finally got accomplished what I needed to in posting all the information that we've been talking about. So if you click on the CEO information tab, it's going to look a little different than maybe the last time you were out there. So what we have at the top is the initial roles and responsibilities. This is the guide and the PowerPoint of the training that you all as CEOs went through last fall. We're slowly but surely adding modules of a recorded version of that training, and we're working to update a couple of those things. And if you keep going, you'll see the CEO's office hours section organized by date with a little bit of a header about what we covered in that specific week's office hours call so that you can maybe more quickly find a topic that you were thinking that we've covered. On a couple of them where we didn't necessarily have a topic and we just chatted and had some generic discussion, that's what it'll say. But if you click on one of these links, it'll pull up the recording of our call and then a place for you to download the slides, the slideshow presentation from each of the biweekly calls. And then soon I will also add a section for the fiscal agent training. When we redo that training on September 16th and re-record it, we'll get that posted because it's going to change quite a bit from the training that was already provided in June. So we'll get that posted and have that available for the fiscal agents as well. So this is a good place for me to pause. Are there any questions about the website or the responsibility of the local area in regards to the websites? Okay, doesn't seem like it. And we do have a small group today, so we might get through this stuff pretty quick. The next thing that I wanted to talk to you all about was a notice of intent to apply for the Pandemic National Dislocated Worker Grant. So I believe I've mentioned this on a couple of calls, but as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Department of Labor put out the ability for states to apply for what are called National Dislocated Worker Grants, or NDWG. So IWD did that on behalf of the state of Iowa, and we were awarded about $1.6 million in funding as what's referred to as an Employment Recovery NDWG. So this is a grant that provides us with additional dislocated worker dollars to help in getting people who were impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic, get them back to work. So anybody who was dislocated as a result of COVID-19 would be able to be certified or served under this grant. And the way that this grant will work is going to be a little bit different than when IWD has had some NDWGs in the past. And so what we will do is here today, when we're done, I'm going to send out an email letting you know that there's a Google form that can be filled out by your local boards or the CEOs if there is no local board yet, I would suppose. Which is essentially a notice of intent to apply. And while that is not an official application for funds for your local area, what it will do is provide us as IWD some information that we can use when we fill out our complete application. Because at this point, what we've done is we've filled out what's called an emergency application with very little detailed information to the Department of Labor. They've approved it, and now we have to fill out a full grant application that very clearly details out how this $1.6 million will be spent. So the notice of intent to apply is intended to be used by the local boards to give us an idea of, yes, our local area would like to apply for some of this funding, and at a high level, here's the type of services that we want to provide. So if you can fill that out, that's great. It's not a requirement, but some point in the next month or so, we'll put out an actual application that the local board would be required to file if they want to access a portion of that funding. And that application would include a fully developed project plan and budget plan that tells us what you're going to do with the funds. So, Central Iowa Local Workforce Development Board would like $100,000, and we're going to use $20,000 of that to send, 20 people through a short-term credential program. And we're going to spend $20,000 on that on staff time to, case manage those participants. And we're going to spend $50,000 on supportive services for those participants and pay for their daycare or buy them a computer. All those details would be laid out in that project plan. Once IWD receives all the applications, they would be scored, and awards would be sent out to the local areas based on those project designs and the innovative approaches that are laid out within them. One other thing to point out is that these funds will be distributed through your fiscal agents. So in the past, again, as the other previous contracts were, these funds would have been given directly to the service provider, and that cannot happen anymore. So it will be the local board that applies, not the service provider, and it will be the fiscal agent who receives the funds, who then contracts the funds out to the adult DW service provider to carry through that intent that was laid out in the project plan of the application. So it will require quite a bit of coordination with your service provider, but it is the board that is the applicant. So this is more of just a heads up kind of overview of what that process will look like. There will be much more information coming out in email and posted online in the coming weeks, and I will make sure that you have all that information. Of the $1.6 million, there is going to be a statewide project plan that happens where some of the funds are kept at a state level in a project implemented. And we're thinking right around $1 to $1.1 million of the total funding would be able to be distributed out to the local areas. So that's quite a bit of funding to get some extra dislocated worker dollars into your area to serve all of the extra participants you potentially have right now. It is a multi-year grant, so the funding does not have to be expended right away. You have, I think, don't quote me, I think 2 years, but it could be possibly 3, but I think 2 on most NDWGs. So there's a little bit more time to spend that money as well and really serve people long-term. So any questions about the NDWG?
Michelle, there's a question in the chat.
Oh, okay.
So is this just additional DW funding? So what is the distinction between the pandemic NDWG and just normal dislocated worker funding?
Got it. So, and Laura, you might have to dive in here and save me a little bit, but the formula funds are really designed to be used for any dislocated worker, right? You could be one person who lost your job for any reason and you're a dislocated worker. With the National Dislocated Worker Grants, it comes from a pot of discretionary funds that the federal government has, and there's typically a very specific intent with those funds. For example, last year, the state of Iowa in 2019, and we're still going right now, has an NDWG because of the flooding that happened in the spring of 2019. But those funds can only be used to very specifically complete what's the word I'm looking for? Activities that are in response to that flooding, right? So typically when you do an NDWG, and it depends on the type that you do, because there are multiple types, and we did the employment recovery NDWG, which is going to give us a lot more flexibility. You have to specifically say who you're going to serve. So for example, with an NDWG, there is the ability for, let's say there's a company, Dave Baker, Flex Steel, laid off about 200 people a few months ago, right? You have the ability to apply for an NDWG specific to that one company because there were more than 50 people dislocated, okay? So there's different types and there's different ways to apply for NDWGs. Typically, if you applied, let's say for an NDWG that was specifically to respond to the Flex Steel, you could only use those DW funds for people that were laid off from Flex Steel, right? I'm getting a little bit off tangent just to give you some examples. So let me bring it back to this NDWG. What we were able to do is apply for an employment recovery DWG industry-wide layoff, but DOL has clarified for us that any dislocated worker that became dislocated as a result of the pandemic is eligible to receive benefits under this grant. So it is additional DW funding to aid anybody that was dislocated due to the pandemic. That's a little bit strange because typically these NDWGs are much more specific. So in this case, you know, practically everybody could say in some way, shape, or form it was because of the pandemic at this point, right? So we really do have quite a bit of latitude, but the intent of the funds is to aid people who were impacted by the pandemic and getting them back into employment as quickly as possible. Do you have anything to add, Lori?
Yes. So, well, I do. So not to correct anything. I mean, you got it all right as far as I know, but just in thinking about this at the local area, you know, these, like Michelle was saying, these are typically very specific event-oriented pots of money. So the disaster grant and now the pandemic grant. One of the things that the local workforce board and the local workforce board staff, you know, this is great to have this infusion of money. And one of the things that those local boards may want to do is, and I'm going to say this, Michelle, and if it's not allowable, then just absolutely tell me to hush. But one of the things that the local workforce board may want to do once they decide how they would like to spend this pandemic money and they get it is there may be individuals that you were already serving, that you started serving in the past couple of months on a just regular dislocated worker money that you would be able to move over to the grant and then thereby free up other dislocated worker money for those individuals who don't apply for the pandemic funding. So it's really an opportunity to, yes, of course, getting money is great, and we want to be able to get that to be able to serve the people, but it's also an opportunity to make sure that you're using the funds that you have available in the most efficient manner. And so being able to look at this opportunity strategically about how it can help you serve more people and serve more people, you know, across the board and not just around the pandemic. So one, I hope that that's correct, but then two, I also hope that that makes sense. So
yeah, I would agree. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So just for timing purposes, again, I'm going to be sending out an email probably as soon as we're off of the call today with a little bit more information. It'll have a link to a Google form for local boards or board staff or CEOs if you don't have a board to help right now. Fill out sort of this intent to apply, where you try to give us some of those basic details about a project plan. So just as an FYI, it's not something that you would click and be able to just fill out right now. It'll take a little bit of discussion and planning with the partners in your area. But it would be very beneficial for us if we had that information and help us do a better job of filling out that full application for the Department of Labor, therefore getting the money into the local areas quicker. So just as an FYI. And then again, after that, in a few weeks, we will be putting out the official notice of funding, which is when you would apply for the actual funds and do a full, complete project narrative and budget narrative. And we will continue to provide support, because I know that this is also going to be a new process for local boards, as again, something like this has typically been done directly by the service provider in the past. So another change, but that's okay. We'll get there and we'll get you the money and be able to continue to help people. So not hearing any other questions, I will move on to our next topic, which really is just any general questions that anybody has today.
Hi, Michelle, it's Miranda.
Hi.
Hi. So I had a question about the rapid response funds.
Yeah.
Our fiscal agent received the contract and everything. My question is, how do we contract that out to the service providers? Do they need to provide us like a budget for that document, or for that additional funding? Or do we have to do a contract amendment with them? Or how do we actually
Got it.
to them?
Let me follow up, Miranda, just because, again, this is all new for us as well. And it was a separate contract from us to you, because it is a separate pot of funding from our perspective. So let me double check that if you need to do a separate contract then down to the service provider or not. Those funds are very specifically required to be used on direct career services only. So, you know, there's a difference. A direct career for service, for example, is staff time. Staff time is an allowable cost under that pot of money. Okay. And providing that the one-on-one counseling and things like that. What you can't do with that funding is use it to pay tuition for somebody to go to training, right? Because that's a training expense. So this is a way where the service provider, maybe, again, as Lori was mentioning, even with the NDWG, that having this extra bit of funding that you can maybe use for staff time would free up some of the other formula DWG funds to allow to have more money to put towards tuition or supportive services or things like that. Does that make sense? And I know that's not completely the question you asked me, but let me follow up on exactly whether we think you need to do a separate contract or not.
Okay, and I know with the rapid response, that's all participant costs, but under the National Dislocated Worker Grant, is there admin dollars in that, or is that all program?
With the NDWG, you would be able to have admin, you'd be able to do training costs, supportive services costs, whatever it is that you decide you need to do to put into your project plan. The same caps would apply. There would be a 10% admin cap on the total funds.
So it has the same restrictions for expenditures as the adult and dislocated work.
Right. Yeah, Lori, correct me if I'm wrong, but with an NDWG such as that, you would be able to apply those funds in the same way you would formula NDWGs. It's just a separate pot of funding.
Exactly. And the same administrative limitation is going to apply, 10% typically. But yeah, pretty much the same.
And so one of the things that honestly just popped into my head, and maybe Lori, you can help me figure this out, or Wendy, this is a lot of different funding streams coming at you guys at the same time. And so it might be beneficial for us to sort of chart out, okay, here's what you can do with your formula funds. Here's what you can do with these rapid response additional assistance funds. Here's what you could do with funds from an NDWG, sort of on one. I'm just envisioning like a desk aid one-page chart that might help distinguish between the different pots and how they can sort of work together, if that makes sense.
That would be great, Michelle.
So I can try to work on that.
Thank you.
Jack Willie, I think it would be extremely helpful.
I think it would help me too, Jack. I'll work on that.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions today?
This is Michelle in Southwest Iowa.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi. So do you have the specific dates and times and like location venue for the fiscal training that's coming up in mid-September?
Yes, I have dates and times, and it will be virtual on a Zoom call. So I just need to make sure I have all of the fiscal agent contact information, and then I can get that scheduled for them. So if that's something that you have.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Michelle, it's Miranda again, and you might have said this and I missed it, but how long is that intent Google Drive going to be open for boards to gather their information? And
yeah, absolutely. I did not say it yet. We have on there to have it completed by the end of the day on the 19th, which is a Wednesday. So it's about a week and a half away. I know that's not a ton of time, but it is pretty high level, right? So, you know, it doesn't need that nitty gritty detail. It's just wanting us to sort of gauge how many applications and in what ways people might intend to use the funding. So, and if you're working on that and you have any questions, Wendy Greenman, who's my bureau chief over the Title I programs, can absolutely help you with that. And we can, you know, the other thing that I would say again is this is a new process for boards, I think, in most areas. So if there's any way that we can, you know, if we need to sit down and have discussions with you about what that looks like and what types of things you will have to include in an application or how you could possibly use those funds. I mean, we're completely willing to do that. We want every penny of this money to be used to help people in the state and do it successfully. So any questions or any way that we can be supportive to help you all figure out how to apply and how to use the funds, we're willing to do that too. Just reach out to me and I can get something organized for us individually, with you in your local area or as a group, whatever works for you guys.
Thank you, Michelle. I will probably be in contact.
No problem.
Hey, Michelle, this is Kyle Secker.
Hi, Kyle.
I heard you say the state was receiving about 1.6 million and probably 1 to 1.1 would be able to go out to the local areas. So is that other $500,000, is that admin money for the state, or is that what's the state using that money for?
Nope. So what I said, so the same admin caps apply for us. And honestly, we only get the 5% admin cap to administer the grant as a whole for the state. So we have that part, obviously. We are looking to use $400,000 to $500,000 of the funding on a statewide project. So it will still be used to serve direct participants, but at a statewide level. And we have the, you know, that's a perfectly acceptable intent of the grant right now. What we're doing is looking at putting out an RFP to find a provider of online training in specifically IT to give people short-term credentials and be able to get them employed in jobs doing IT work. There's a funding then included to support participants by getting them equipment to be able to do that and all sorts of things. So that's where the majority of that other chunk of the money goes. So it still goes to serve participants, but it goes statewide, right? Instead of specifically in individual levels or individual areas, sorry.
Okay, thanks for that. And then I was just gonna share a little bit of information for anyone else who may go through the same situation, but with our fiscal agent being a county government entity, the Clay County Auditor's Office specifically, we have ran into a pretty sizable snag on the funding side of it because they did not, due to the timeline of when we received information of what our local area budget would be, it was after the county government budgeting process. So Clay County did not have anything in their budget for the local area expenditures, which then forced them to go through a budget amendment process, which is, there's a whole timeline for publishing and public hearings and all that stuff. So our region will not be able to send out any money until, I believe, August 28th or something like that. It would be whatever that Tuesday is. And that would be when it could first be requested and then processed after that. So we're going to be looking at a couple month delay on sending any money out because of that. So just a heads up for anyone else who may be dealing with that.
Kyle, this is Lori. I have a question about that, and that's helpful to know, I'm sure, for some of the others. So each time IWD issues additional or allocates additional funds, will that same process have to happen?
If it's above what was budgeted, yes. So I believe in Clay County's budget amendment, they put in, I don't remember exactly what the number was, but they went higher than what was contracted. So I believe our rapid response money will fit inside there. Okay. But now this new grant, if there's a $100,000, for example, that we get from that, we may be over that number and they may have to amend again. So okay. That's a pretty good roadblock.
Sure. Okay. That's good to know. Thanks.
And that's, I mean, the biggest part of the challenges for that is the timeliness, because if we find out right close to when we get the money, and then you have to, it takes time for processing the paperwork, and then you have publication time and actual meetings to get it approved, and it's a pretty substantial process.
Sure.
Kyle, this is Jack, and I agree. That's government at work.
I won't disagree with you there.
That's for darn sure. They never make anything simple.
Okay, thanks for sharing that, Kyle. Is there anything else that anybody wants to discuss today? Oops, I moved my...
Hi, Michelle. It's Miranda again.
Hi.
Sorry. So on the meeting earlier this morning at the Title I directors meeting, you said that there'd be guidance released next week on the MOU.
Yes.
But it wouldn't be guidance on developing a compliant MOU.
Yes.
So I guess my question is, is the MOU and the IFA, I mean, do we have to have that in place by December 31st of this year?
That's a great question. Okay, so let me just catch everybody up on what Miranda's speaking about. So typically the Title I directors, so the service providers, have had a group where they meet on a monthly basis. And so they've now included Heather attends, and Miranda, and I'm not sure who else has been attending those calls. But what they asked about was the MOU. And according to WIOA and then our state law, the MOUs are required to be, we have to renegotiate them. When I say we, the local areas should be renegotiating those every 3 years, I believe is what our state policy says. And that deadline to renegotiate was actually July 1 of 2019. Well, last year at that time, you can imagine or remember that we were in the midst of all of this transformation and waiting for the appeal with the state board on the realignment and all that stuff. So what we did was issue a field memo that allowed for the existing 15 local areas to extend the MOUs they had in place through June 30th of 2020. And they all did that. The MOUs that they extended are not compliant in the fact that they don't contain all of the required partners that are required under WIOA. and they don't contain any information about IFAs, which is the Infrastructure Funding Agreement, and that's a huge piece of the MOU. In order for the local areas in Iowa to have compliant MOUs, including infrastructure funding agreements, the state needs to publish policy regarding that. And I say the state because it is not simply IWD that would control that policy, because those MOUs and IFAs concern all WIOA core partners. So that's Titles 1 and 3 at IWD, it's Title 2 at the Department of Education, and it's Title 4 at VR and the Department for the Blind. So all of those core partner agencies, we have a working group where we're working on policy as we speak in several areas, local plans, MOUs, lots of things, right? And so there is no policy right now for states or for local areas to put together a compliant MOU in the state of Iowa. So what I've been discussing with our legal team is how best to sort of tackle this going forward. And what we've landed on is that it's best that that your local areas are operating on some sort of an MOU, okay? And so for the local areas that have not realigned and have the same boundaries as they did before, they could simply do an extension of that existing MOU to move forward, knowing that it's an agreement for the main partners to continue to work together to provide workforce services in the area, but it's not a fully compliant MOU under WIOA. For local areas such as Mississippi Valley, where you've combined two previous local areas, even though it is very highly possible that the MOU under Region 9 and the MOU under Region 16 were basically the exact same one with a cut and paste for the different partner names, you can't simply extend it, right? Because you're a new local area. So what we're gonna work on and hope to have out next week is a template for an MOU that would allow you to operate currently as that new local area, but knowing that, again, it's not a fully compliant MOU because it will not contain any information about the infrastructure funding agreement, which is a requirement of the MOU under WIOA. So that guidance will come out to everybody at the same time, sort of two scenarios, right? You're a local area that didn't change your boundaries and is the same as before, so you probably can just renew the one you have for the time being, and then I'm a new local area that was a combination of previous regions and I need to kind of do something new, but it won't be fully compliant. So that, like I said, hopefully next week we can get that out, and then hopefully, knock on wood, because this is pretty intense policy, I'm not gonna lie, and Lori can attest to it. We've been working on it for months and months. And, you know, the next State Workforce Development Board meeting is scheduled for October 23rd. So our goal is to take quite a few policies of those joint policies that need to be issued, MOUs, local plans, all those types of things, one-stop certification, hopefully get that in front of the state board for approval on October 23rd, and then have plans going forward from that date for when the local boards would need to have some of those next key pieces in place, right? And obviously understanding that these are not things that can be written and accomplished overnight. And so what I would assume is that we will advise you next week in a field memo that existing MOUs could be extended for another year through July or June 30, 2021, and new MOUs that, like, for example, Mississippi Valley would put in place could be for the next, 12 months until we have official policy in place and you have time to complete a compliant MOU in your area. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I was just hoping that we didn't have to have them completed by the end of the year if we were.
No, there's enough going on.
Okay, good.
So we know that these are not things that can be just, snap your fingers and accomplish. So we're gonna work with people to make sure that they have time to accomplish these things and they can be done right, and not just a box to tick off. So.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Michelle, this is Rich Ruggles, and I have a question on this grant.
Okay.
We have a particular, and it's actually pretty close to me, that we have a company that is in multi-states and multi-jurisdictions, even in Iowa. If
Okay.
they file for that money, can they file for all those jurisdictions across our state at the same time? Or can that money just be spent in our local area?
So would you be able to tell me the company, Rich?
Yeah, it's a bus company,
Okay.
Windstar,
Okay.
and they have from Nevada, I believe there's Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, Carroll, and I think Iowa City.
Yeah.
But I know they're in Nevada, and I believe
Okay.
Minnesota. So they're multi-state too. So
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so again, Lori, you be ready to jump in and correct me if I mess this up, but that's a great question, Rich, because realistically, once your local boards are truly established, many of them may want to file to become a 501c3. And once that happens, honestly, they're an entity that can apply for some of these grants directly on their own, and they don't have to be applied for by Iowa. Now, in the situation that you're talking about, most likely what would happen is that the IWD as the state entity would apply for NDWG specific to the Windstar company dislocation, let's say, okay? And then we as a state have the ability to divvy that money out to the local areas that are affected by that. So are you in Mississippi Valley? Did I make that up?
no, I'm in Western Iowa.
Western, okay, I'm sorry. I'm getting real close to figuring out where all these 99 counties are, guys, but I'm not there yet. So you mentioned Des Moines, so Western Iowa. So let's say that, this company operates out of the Western Iowa local area and Central Iowa and East Central Iowa because they're in Cedar Rapids. Then the state would apply because it affects multiple local areas. And then we could take that money and just divvy it out to the local areas that were actually affected. Because if Windstar doesn't operate out of the Mississippi Valley, there's no need for Mississippi Valley to have extra funding to help those people, right? So that's how that would work. But if there was a company, for say, example, that only operated out of the Western Iowa local workforce development area, eventually you will get to a place where your local board could apply directly for those funds and then administer it directly. If you're not there yet as Western Iowa, and we believe there's a need for you to have additional funding through an NDWG, IWD can apply for and administer that grant. And again, the funding then would just be only to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And thanks for that, because the last time I talked, and it's been about a month since I've talked to these people, but they've had to lay off 98% of their workforce.
Yep.
And I think all travel people are in the same boat. So.
Yep. And so this NDWG that I'm talking about, most likely this is a layoff, I'm assuming, that's related to the pandemic in some way, shape, or form, right?
Yep.
So this is the perfect opportunity for you all to sit down and figure out from that company, how many people worked for Windstar in the Western Iowa local workforce development area? Is it 200, let's say? Well, how many of those people aren't back in the workforce yet? And this is where the Labor Market Information Department at IWD can assist with gathering information and facts, and we can send out dislocated worker surveys to gather information about, you were laid off. Well, what do you want to do? Are you going to try to get right back into the same industry with another company? You need to switch industries. Do you want to go back and get training to be able to switch industries? All sorts of information that can be gathered, right? To then help you design a plan for how to help people. Because even though we would love to say 200 people got laid off from Windstar in Western Iowa, and we're going to put 200 of them through training and get them back, that's not realistic, right? So you hope you can serve 33% of them or 50% of them, or, those are the types of things that you would think through. And this is the exact pot of funding that we need to get to you to help with that. Okay. And so that's a great example. There was one other thing I was going to say, and it just flew out of my head.
There's a Windstar in Dubuque too.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many places they really do have. They have a lot. Yep.
And so the other thing is that, again, with this one, this NDWG specific to the pandemic, it's not specific to a company, right? So you can serve anybody in your local area that was affected by the pandemic. And And I'll be perfectly honest, when we initially wrote the emergency application, we submitted it to say that based on labor market information data, 2 of the hardest hit industries in Iowa were retail, trades, right? And restaurant industry, right? And we had some information from the restaurant industry associations in Iowa that, you know, said there's 1,000 restaurants in Iowa that won't come back after this. And, you know, how many people does that leave unemployed and things like that. But then DOL has since clarified that even though they required us in the emergency application to pick an industry sector that we were going to serve with this grant, anybody that was affected by the pandemic can be served. And realistically, those industries are some of the, first of all, hardest to serve, because it's a type of industry where people can, you know, okay, I got laid off at McDonald's, so now I'll go work at Burger King, right? There are a lot of options typically, depending on where you're at. But they also are the perfect opportunity in population of people to try to get upskilled, to get into hopefully a more long-term type career, right? So there are so many opportunities with this grant to help people that I think that it should be very helpful to all of you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else?
Just say these are great sessions.
Thanks, Jack.
They really are.
Good. Well, and I'm just really happy I finally learned how to pull the videos down myself and edit them and get them posted myself. So you guys won't have to wait weeks anymore. I should have this posted early next week, just because I am going to be off mostly the rest of the day today and Monday for a funeral, and then I'll be back to work. So hopefully early next week I'll have this up and posted. And again, I mean, Wendy, I know you're listening in. Our team is more than willing to help you all figure out a way to apply for and effectively use these funds, because there are just some phenomenal opportunities for people here. And so please reach out if that's something that you think we could help with. And always, you know how to contact us if you do have any questions. And yeah, we'll talk. Our next meeting is, let me check. Let's see, 2 weeks, August 21st. So we'll continue this. And if you have any questions in the meantime, submit them. I'm not sure yet what we would talk about that day, but we'll figure out something. And if you have any questions, submit them, and I can definitely get them included for everybody as well. So I think that's it. Thank you guys for joining. I hope you have a great weekend.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Michelle.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.